The world arrived in fragments. Sound came first, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through something solid surrounding him on all sides. Then sensation, a biting cold that wasn't unpleasant, more like plunging into a mountain stream on a blazing afternoon. Finally, with a crack that split the air like a thunderclap, light flooded in. Garen blinked. His vision was wrong. Everything existed in too much detail. The crystalline structure of ice formations 20 meters away, the microscopic patterns etched into individual snowflakes drifting past the cave entrance, the faint shimmer of heat rising from a creature sleeping nearby. His eyes processed all of it simultaneously without effort, without strain, as though they had been designed for exactly this kind of impossible clarity. His ears were another matter entirely. Every sound arrived amplified and layered. Wind outside the cave entrance carried 17 distinct frequencies. The sleeping creature's breathing had a rhythm like distant ocean waves, and somewhere deep in the rock beneath him, water moved through underground channels he could somehow sense but not see. Something is wrong, he thought, and then immediately realized the absurdity of that observation. Everything was wrong. He had been reading a novel. He remembered that clearly. The soft weight of a paperback, the warm lamp on his nightstand, the distant sound of traffic several floors below his apartment window. Yongjin, 26 years old, unremarkable Tuesday evening, perfectly ordinary life. Then darkness. Then this. He tried to sit up and discovered that his body did not move the way a body was supposed to move. His arms were wrong, too long, bending at unfamiliar angles, ending not in hands but in something that scraped against the shell fragments surrounding him with a sound like steel on stone. He looked down and found himself staring at claws. White claws, thick as his former fingers had been long, emerging from a forelimb covered in scales that caught the dim cave light and scattered it in small prismatic bursts. He opened his mouth to say something and produced instead a sound that shook dust from the ceiling. The sleeping creature stirred. Whatever rationality remained from his previous life told him to stay still, stay quiet, assess before acting. The instincts of the body he now inhabited disagreed. They recognized immediately what had moved, recognized the scale of it, and generated a response that was less fear and more awe pressed so tightly together they became indistinguishable. She was enormous. The white dragoness filled nearly a third of the cavern. Her scales were the color of fresh snow in morning light, each one the size of a shield, layered over a body built like a cathedral, all sweeping arches and impossible structural integrity. Her wings, folded against her sides, would have blotted out the sky if extended. Her tail curled around the treasure mound she slept beside, unconsciously protective even in rest. When her eyes opened, they were the pale yellow of old ivory, and they fixed on him with an expression he could only describe as calculating danger. She was trying to decide what he was. The memories came to him then, not his own, but ancient, inherited things, the accumulated knowledge of a lineage that stretched back to before human civilization had learned to build with stone. Dragon heritage. He understood it the way one understands language spoken since birth, without effort, without having to translate, simply knowing. He understood what she was looking at. He understood why she was confused. He was far too large for a newly hatched dragon. Where hatchlings should be small, fragile, uncertain, he was built like a young lion, solid and proportioned, his white scales already fitted together with the seamless precision they should not have achieved for months. And around his neck, a ring of black scales circled him completely, each one darker than the others, fitted so precisely they might have been placed there by a jeweler with infinite patience. That ring meant something. He was not yet certain what. The danger in the dragoness's pale eyes sharpened. She shifted her weight, and the cave floor trembled. He spoke before she could act. The name came from the deepest part of the inherited memory, the first and most essential piece of dragon identity, the thing that separated a true dragon from a creature that merely resembled one. He shaped it in the dragon tongue, and it rang through the cavern like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Harin Augustus Sol Aurelian. The silence afterward was absolute. Then, slowly, the danger in her eyes faded. Not into warmth. He would learn quickly that warmth was not something she kept in inventory, but into a kind of neutral acknowledgement. She lowered her massive head, studied him for one more long moment, and then settled back into the curve of her own tail and closed her eyes. He had passed whatever test she'd been administering. Garen, he was already thinking of himself that way. Yongjin receding like a dream, remembered mid-afternoon, already blurring at the edges, looked down at himself properly for the first time. White scales, a body that felt powerful in a way his human form had never approached, every muscle precisely calibrated, the bones beneath his scales dense and strong as compressed stone. He turned his head and caught his reflection in the polished surface of his mother's flank, which served as an imperfect but functional mirror. Platinum eyes looked back at him. Not silver, not light gray. Platinum, the color of something rare and expensive and slightly unreal. He stared at them for a long moment, these eyes that had never belonged to Yongjin, and felt the strange double sensation of recognition and foreignness that would follow him for some time. Accept it, he told himself. This is what is real now. The decision settled into him cleanly, like a key finding the right lock. He was Garen. He was a white dragon. He was hungry. The broken fragments of his shell surrounded him, and the inherited memory supplied the relevant information without being asked. Eggshell, for newly hatched dragons, provided essential nutrients and a concentrated burst of elemental energy that supported the first hours of independent life. The taste would vary by dragon type. He ate a piece and discovered it tasted remarkably like cold dark chocolate. He was still contemplating this unexpected pleasant surprise when the egg beside him cracked. The process took longer than his own hatching had seemed to, but then he had no memory of his own emergence, only its aftermath. He watched the second egg shudder and split with a kind of proprietary interest, the way one might watch a new neighbor move into the apartment next door. What emerged was smaller than him, considerably smaller. Where he was built like something designed to eventually grow into a mountain, she was built like something designed to be graceful about it. Finer lines, more elegant proportions, scales that caught the light differently, as though they had been polished from the inside. She oriented herself quickly, assessed her surroundings with the efficient attention of a creature whose instincts were already well calibrated, and then spoke. Hill. Her voice in the dragon tongue was clear and high and musical, like someone had taught silver to make sound. She began eating her shell immediately, with the focused intensity of someone who had priorities and intended to address them in order. Garen watched her eat and was visited by a thought that was, he would later reflect, extremely characteristic of the creature he was becoming. Her shell is right there, and she has plenty of it, and she would never notice if some of it relocated itself. He waited until her attention was on her own portion, then swept several fragments toward himself with a careful, unhurried motion of his tail. They tasted like ice cream, specifically like the very good vanilla ice cream from a shop near his old apartment, the kind with the real vanilla bean flecks. He was considering this sensory data with considerable interest when he realized the cave had grown quieter in a particular way. He looked up. His mother was watching him. Her pale yellow eyes held no readable emotion. She simply observed him observing her, and the moment stretched between them like taffy. Garen looked at the piece of stolen shell in his tail. He looked at Hill, who had not noticed anything. He looked at his mother. Then, with the practiced expression of someone who had absolutely intended to do this all along, he nudged the piece of shell gently in Hill's direction. Hill took it without acknowledgement or thanks, in the manner of a creature for whom receiving was simply the natural state of things. Their mother looked away. Garen filed this interaction under lessons learned and began thinking about the larger problem of hunger, which the shell had addressed only partially and which his body was making very clear remained a significant outstanding concern. The cave floor was frozen solid. Not simply cold, frozen with the specific and deliberate permanence of magical ice, the kind that didn't yield to applied force or gradual warming, the kind that existed because something very powerful had decided it should. He could feel the elemental energy woven through it, his dragon senses reading the crystalline structure the way a musician might read sheet music. He tested it with his teeth anyway. The floor did not care about his teeth. He attempted, with somewhat more subtlety, to communicate hunger to his mother through a combination of significant looks and gentle nudging. His mother gazed back at him with the patient blankness of someone watching weather happen to someone else. He tried affection. He had watched his old neighbor's cat deploy affection with surgical precision to extract food from resistant humans, and it had always worked. He pressed his head against his mother's side and produced what the dragon tongue had no specific word for, but which he privately categorized as plaintive noises. His mother looked at him the way a glacier looks at everything, without particular investment. He gave up on affection as a strategy. The remaining 4 eggs were shuddering with increasing urgency, their occupants making the preliminary calculations of emergence. He watched them with the particular attention of someone who has identified a potential resource. He was larger than whoever would come out of those eggs. He was already larger than Hill. The mathematics of this situation favored him considerably. Then his mother moved. She stretched, a motion that took up most of the available cave space and involved her wings extending briefly before folding back, and walked to the cave entrance with the unhurried authority of a creature that had never once in its life needed to hurry for anything. She paused at the threshold, looked back at the nest with an expression that communicated approximately, "I have noted the situation and will take it under advisement," and then launched herself into the blizzard beyond. The sound of her wings beat through the storm like thunder moving away. Garen turned to look at what she had left behind. The treasure pile occupied a significant portion of the cave. He had been aware of it in a peripheral way since hatching. The dragon instincts registered the same way human instincts registered warmth or food, as something fundamentally relevant. But with his mother's departure, it moved from background awareness to immediate foreground. Weapons lay tangled with ceremonial armor. Scrolls wrapped in oilskin nestled against jewelry boxes that had lost their owners decades or centuries ago. And among all of it, catching what little light filtered through the storm outside, a galaxy of gemstones in every color that light could take. Garen sat with this view for approximately 4 seconds before his dragon heritage and his former human appreciation for economic value merged into something that could only be described as a calling. He wanted one of those gems. More specifically, he needed one. The inherited knowledge was clear on this point. Magical gemstones could accelerate a young dragon's early development significantly, providing concentrated elemental energy that the body would otherwise spend weeks or months acquiring through ordinary means. For a hatchling in the high mortality window between emergence and first successful self-sufficiency, this was not luxury. It was strategy. The problem was Hill. She was watching him with the alert, disinterested gaze of a creature who had no specific plan but retained the option to develop one at any moment. If she saw him approach the treasure, she would tell their mother, not necessarily from loyalty, but simply because information was currency and she was already instinctively accumulating it. He solved this problem with a precisely calibrated headbutt, not damaging. He was careful about that, a careful calibration of force that would produce unconsciousness without injury, because whatever their relationship was going to be, it seemed unwise to begin it with actual harm. Hill folded neatly and lay still, her breathing steady, a small confused expression preserved on her sleeping face. 30 minutes, he told her, though she couldn't hear him, because it felt like the thing to say. Then he turned to the treasure and began working. Dragons remembered every item in their hoard. This was not metaphor or exaggeration. The capacity was structural, built into the memory the same way night vision was built into the eyes. His mother would notice a missing gem with the same certainty she would notice a missing wing. He needed a replacement. The gem he had selected was small and isolated at the base of the pile, a white crystal with a diamond-cut face that held ice element magic in concentrations he could feel from 3 feet away. Perfect for a white dragon. Perfect for him. And positioned in such a way that extracting it without disturbing the surrounding pile was possible. given sufficient patience and fine motor control. He practiced the replacement first. His frost breath was, he discovered, considerably more controllable than it had any right to be. He shaped the elemental energy with a precision that surprised him, forming ice crystals into the crystal's exact geometry, matching its dimensions with the careful attention of someone who found this genuinely interesting. The first attempt collapsed into irregular fragments. He studied it, identified the structural failure, and tried again. He kept one eye on Hill and one eye on the storm beyond the cave entrance. Attempt 4 was imperfect. Attempt 7 had a flaw visible only when light hit it from a specific angle. Attempt 11 was, by his assessment, indistinguishable from the original in anything but magical content. Hill stirred. He tapped her back in his sleep with the same careful calibration as before, felt a small flicker of something that might have been guilt, and pushed it aside because there were priorities. Then he moved to the treasure pile, and with the focus of a watchmaker doing their finest work, he drew the real crystal free and set his imitation in its place. He swallowed the crystal whole. The effect was immediate and overwhelming, a cascade of icy energy that moved through him like a river finding its natural course, filling the hollow that hunger had carved with something that felt less like satisfaction and more like completion. His cells accelerated. His awareness sharpened. He felt himself growing in some essential way that had nothing to do with physical size. He ran to the cave entrance to watch for his mother. She was already visible through the storm, a white shape moving with terrifying speed, her wings cutting through the blizzard with the efficiency of something that had been doing this for centuries. Her cold, pale eyes were fixed on the cave. Absorb faster, he told himself, and the crystal's energy obeyed with an urgency that surprised him. Then the world stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. A snowflake hung 6 inches from his face, perfectly preserved, every branch of its fractal structure outlined in the still air. His mother hung suspended between 2 wing beats, frozen mid-motion like a sculpture of a dragon rather than the dragon herself. The wind did not blow. The storm did not storm. Garen looked up, above the cave entrance, above the cliff face, above the mountains, somewhere that was not quite the sky and not quite elsewhere. Something vast was coiled. He did not have good language for what he saw. It was a dragon the way a mountain is a pile of rocks, technically accurate and completely inadequate. Its scales were silver white and fitted to its body with the precise tension of something that had grown into its form over uncountable centuries. Black markings crossed its hide in uneven lines that somehow suggested growth rings, layers of time made visible. Its wingspan exceeded the mountains below it. Its eyes were the same platinum as Garen's own, looking down at him with an expression that carried both recognition and something that might have been affection, if affection could exist at geological scales. It smiled at him, somehow, though the face was not designed for human expressions, the meaning was unmistakable, and then flicked its tail and became a streak of white light that shrank as it fell and merged into Garen's chest with a warmth that spread through him like sunrise. The world resumed. His mother's wings completed their beat. The snowflake finished its fall. The wind picked up where it had left off, apparently having been waiting politely for permission. And Garen stood at the cave entrance with new knowledge blooming in his mind like ink dropped into clear water, spreading and dispersing until it had colored everything. He understood now what the ring of black scales meant. He sat beside the icy wall of the cave and studied his reflection, those platinum eyes, that ring of darkness at his neck, and let the inherited knowledge of the time drag and settle into him like sediment finding the bottom of a still lake. The world of dragons, as he now understood it, was organized with the specific clarity of something that had been working out its own taxonomy for longer than human civilization had existed to observe it. 15 primary types of true dragon inhabited the material plane. 5 evil, the chromatic dragons, red and blue and green and black and white, built for dominance and cruelty and the hoarding of power in its most literal form. 5 noble, the metallics, gold and silver and brass and bronze and copper, respected by creatures that valued such things as respect. 5 neutral, the gem dragons, amethyst and crystal and emerald and sapphire and topaz, wise enough to mostly want nothing to do with the conflicts of the other 10. He had been born, apparently, as a white dragon, the weakest of the chromatic line. The dragon most likely to die before reaching adulthood, with a survival rate that the inherited memory reported in the same dry tone one might use to discuss weather statistics. Fewer than 1 in 10 reached maturity. But, beyond the 15 primary types, the dragon heritage recorded others. Rare ones, extraordinary ones, axis dragons and celestial dragons and calamity dragons, whose very names carried weight. And then, rarer still, 3 types so infrequent that across every world and every plane, their total population might not reach double digits. Force dragons, rainbow dragons, time dragons, the chrono dragon, the eternal dragon, the creature that breathed time itself, that existed simultaneously across past and present and future, that the dragon heritage described in terms that bordered on theological. He was a variant of one, not a true time dragon. Those were born already at the peak of their potential, already legendary, almost impossible to encounter and more impossible to harm. He was something adjacent to that, a white dragon shell containing something else, something that had not been born legendary, but whose potential exceeded even the natural article. He looked at the ring of black scales and understood it differently now. Not decoration, not mutation. A symbol, perhaps, the circle that had no beginning and no end, the shape that time made when you followed it long enough. I need to survive, he thought, with the sudden clarity of someone who has just received very large news and is trying to find their footing beneath it. Everything else is secondary to that. The gods would want him. Any sufficiently powerful being would want to possess a time dragon, as an artifact, as a servant, as a trophy. If his nature became known before he was strong enough to defend it, the consequences would be swift and catastrophic. He slapped himself with one claw. Not hard, just enough to interrupt the spiral of ambition that had begun forming in the back of his mind, the one that involved words like dragon god and supreme deity and other things that were, practically speaking, quite far away from his current situation of being a hungry hatchling in a cave in the northern ice fields. Survive, he said aloud in the dragon tongue, making it a rule. 100 years. Adult dragons came into their full power at a century. For an ordinary white dragon, 100 years was an enormous and uncertain span. For a time dragon variant who apparently grew 10 times faster than normal and whose passage through time strengthened rather than diminished him. He did some rough mathematics and found the results encouraging. From across the cave, Hill raised her head and looked at him with the expression of someone who had just been interrupted from an important project and would like this to be noted. Their mother arrived home shortly afterward, landing with the casual, controlled force of a creature that had never once in its life needed to be careful about the weight it put on a floor. She deposited a 6-meter block of ice containing a northern frost bear. Frozen intact, no blood, no struggle, simply a bear that had been given no opportunity to object to being frozen, and went back to sleep. Garen stared at the frost bear for a moment. The frost bear, from within its crystal prison, stared back with an expression that was no longer capable of expressing anything. He ate through the ice like it was flavored sorbet and discovered that the bear beneath it, tough and cold and seasoned by the harsh minerals of the far north, was extraordinary. He ate until he was satisfied, then continued eating because satisfaction and fullness were, he was learning, different thresholds for a dragon, and the body had its own opinions about when to stop. He climbed onto his mother's ice bed, the massive crystal platform she slept on, radiating cold that felt like a welcome rather than a warning, and closed his eyes. His mother stirred, raised her wings, paused, lowered her wings, went back to sleep. Garen slept beside her and grew. The polar blizzard broke after more than 2 weeks, and the world revealed beneath it was enormous and silent and heartbreakingly beautiful. He stood at the cave entrance and looked at it properly for the first time. the far northern ice fields stretching in every direction with the calm certainty of something that had been here before the concept of elsewhere existed. The snow catching the orange light of a sun that provided illumination without warmth, turning everything gold-edged and crystalline. Half a year of endless day. The geography of the place had its own logic, and he understood it the same way he understood dragon speech, inherently, without having to be taught. A week had passed since hatching. His bones were solid. His claws had developed the particular density that made them useful rather than decorative. The 3 siblings who had hatched from the remaining eggs, 2 brothers, eventually named Charles and Tom, through a process Garen had not paid close attention to, and Hill, had all reached the threshold of basic self-sufficiency. Their mother had made this assessment in the most white dragon way possible. She looked at the 2 eggs that had produced dragon beasts rather than true dragons, creatures without the inherited flame of genuine dragon heritage, and with no visible emotion, drove them from her territory. They vanished into the ice fields without ceremony. Garen watched this and filed it under noted. Now the 4 surviving hatchlings stood at the cave's edge and looked down at the 500-meter drop to the snow below. Hill and the 2 brothers had already deployed their wings experimentally. The mechanics of dragon flight, Garen knew from inherited memory, relied less on aerodynamics than on magic, a natural flying enchantment built into every true dragon at the cellular level that made the physics of heavy bodies staying aloft considerably more negotiable than physics typically allowed. His wings spread, caught the magical current in the air the way sails caught wind, and he felt himself lift fractionally off the stone. He was not afraid of the height, exactly. He was cautious about it. There was a distinction. 500 meters. He ran quick calculations about what the landing would involve if something went wrong. Garen, Hill had already launched herself and was executing a slow spiral, maybe 40 meters out from the cliff face, apparently finding the whole enterprise straightforward. "Are you coming?" Charles and Tom, from slightly further out, looked back at him with the specific expression of younger siblings presented with an unexpected opportunity. "Is the eldest brother scared?" One of them said. The dragon tongue had specific tones for rhetorical questions designed to provoke. Garen looked at them. He looked at the sky, which went up forever in directions that had no name yet. He breathed in cold air until his chest was full of it, held it for 1 second, and jumped. The wind hit him like a physical thing, and then his wings found the current, and then he was flying. Not carefully, not tentatively. The magic took hold with the enthusiasm of something that had been waiting for exactly this. And his body, this body that was not his original body, but was undeniably his now, understood itself in the air with a completeness he had never felt on the ground. The snow below looked like fine white powder from up here. The mountains on the southern horizon were small and blue. His siblings were 4 moving shapes against the pale expanse. And above everything was a sky that seemed to go on past all reasonable expectations of sky. He felt something unlock. Oh, he thought. This. He let himself glide for exactly long enough to confirm the feeling was real and not a temporary anomaly. And then he looked at Charles and Tom and narrowed his eyes. "A lesson," he said, "about how to speak to an elder brother." What followed was educational for everyone involved, though the distribution of learning was unequal. Charles came at him from the left. Tom came from the right. They had communicated this plan non-verbally, with the efficient shorthand of siblings who have spent their entire lives, admittedly a very short time, in close proximity. Garen went forward. Not fast by his standards. He was still learning what his standards were, but fast enough. Something happened when he focused his attention in a particular way. The world sharpened. The air seemed to thicken around everything except him, and his movements acquired a quality that he had no better word for than slipped. As though time were a river, and he had found the center current. Charles had just begun to register that something was wrong when Garen hit him. He was careful. The same calibration as with Hill and the stolen shell. Enough force to demonstrate a point without causing anything that wouldn't heal by dinner. He grabbed Charles by the scruff, executed a controlled descent, and introduced him to the snow in the manner of a firm handshake that lasted several seconds and involved his face making extensive contact with the ground. Tom hung in the air at what he apparently calculated to be a safe distance and watched this happen. From 30 meters above, Hill circled with the serene expression of someone watching events that do not directly concern them, but are nonetheless entertaining.